Welcome, everybody, to our fourth episode of our Ask CESO webinar. I hope you'll go back and check out our other three, which were on websites, storytelling, and then this last one was on crisis communications. Today, we're going to be talking about branding. But first, we need to do a few introductions. So first, I'd like to introduce who we are. CESO is part of the Center for Effective School Operations, CESO, and we provide support services to school districts. We're on the communication team for CESO, but CESO also offers transportation, finance, HR, and technology services. Justin, can you join me?
Good morning. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. This is a topic that everybody who will be on screen shortly knows that I have been nerding out over for the last year since I joined this team. So I'm excited to sit in the back and take notes, but also facilitate questions that we have from folks watching on YouTube. So if you're watching out there on YouTube live or on demand, be sure you hit subscribe. Go to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe. Make sure you turn that little bell on, and it will alert you when we go live so that you know and you don't miss an episode. If you are watching live, throw your questions in the chat. We will be throwing those up on screen as the show goes on and answering questions that are on topic that we're talking about today. And then obviously it's a Q&A question. This is a Q&A show. So if you have questions, we're here to answer them. This is a discussion. It's not a presentation. Today, we do have a few visuals we do want to show off just because it helps explain things. But this is a conversation between school PR folks. So we're excited that you're here watching today. You know, normally we do one of these a month, but we are actually going to have our next live episode in August. A group of us from the CESO Communications Team will be in Innsbruck in St. Louis. And we're looking forward to connecting and meeting and hanging out and talking and all the things you do there. We'll be at booth 137, located pretty close to the dogs. If you don't know about the dogs, you'll find out about the dogs. But we also have some presentations going on that week by members of our team. Julie Thanem will be on a panel on Tuesday at 3:15 about when it's time to bring in a consultant. Then Bob Noyd and Nicole, you will be presenting on Wednesday at 3:15 about how to communicate your district's finances amidst all of your community politics. It's going to be an exciting presentation. I'm looking forward to being at Innsbruck for the first time in a couple years and just getting to connect with everybody and see these two great presentations.
Yes. Well, and let me introduce the team that we have with us today. I'm going to start with you, Justin. Justin is a communication strategist for us. He's a former educator, and after 8 years of working in school communication departments in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas, he joined our team in July of last year. He's been recognized by NSPRA and the Texas School Public Relations Association, TSPRA, for his work in social media and video production. And he won the 2020 TSPRA Bright Idea Award for his podcast, School PR Happy Hour. Awesome. We're also bringing on the leader of our division, our Vice President, Bob Noyd. Bob has more than 35 years of experience working in school districts as a strategic communication professional. Prior to joining CESO in 2019, he served as the Director of Communications for several Minneapolis area school districts. Along with his district experience, he served as the 2006-2007 NSPRA President and as NSPRA's North Central Region Vice President in the 99 to 2002. He has also served 2 terms as the president of the Minneapolis chapter, MINSPRA, and he was the 2005 recipient of NSPRA's Barry Gaskins Mentor Legacy Award and received NSPRA's top award, the President's Award, in 2021. And then Coley. Coley is our Director of Communication Services. She has 12 years of experience serving school districts as a communication specialist and a director. 7 years of her career was spent with suburban Minneapolis School District, where she led critical annual projects like back-to-school enrollment campaigns. She also oversaw large-scale change projects like district rebranding efforts, which we'll talk about today, the complete overhaul of district and school websites, and multiple referendum campaigns. Coley brings a unique skill set to each project. She has a talent for design and as well as a talent in project management. And she's just amazing with communication essentials.
And I will introduce you, Nicole, because I say it every time, but it would be awkward for you to have to introduce yourself. So Nicole is a senior strategist for CESO Communications. Before joining CESO, she was responsible for communications in the district in Kansas City, Missouri for 23 years. She recently served as the INSPRA president last year, and she served as the MOSPRA president almost 20 years ago. She's earned the INSPRA Gold Medallion Award and the MOSPRA Professional of the Year Award. So, friends, I'm going to go backstage, look for questions, and listen to you guys talk and feverishly take notes about branding. So, y'all have.
Thank you, Justin. All right, Bob and Coley, let's just dig right in to branding. So, what is branding and what is it not? Bob, will you start with that one?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. It's so much more than a logo or graphic identity. And I, I was awake thinking about this at about 4:15 this morning, and I thought of this graphic that Justin just popped up. If you think about this is the iceberg that we've seen so many times used for so many different comparisons. But uh, if you think about this iceberg, the top of it, the piece above the water, that's the expression. That's the logo. That's the graphic identity. That's how your brand gets expressed. The stuff, the ice, the chunk underneath, that's the foundation. That's the piece that we're going to focus on today. It's the messaging, it's the structure. We're going to use the term brand architecture, and we're going to get into that here in a second. But that's the piece that really is your brand. It helps you build the strategy, and it helps to build the foundation. So without the foundation, without the stuff underneath the water, the graphic identity is just kind of out there floating. It doesn't have substance to it. Um, when we think about brand, we think about it. A brand is really about what makes you unique and how do you separate yourselves from another school district? How do you stand out in the marketplace? That's the kind of terminology that I like to use. What makes you unique, and how do you stand out in the marketplace? Uh, a, your brand should really be your identifier as an organization, and how you make a difference for your stakeholders. One of the questions that we love to ask when we work with school districts: if your organization didn't exist, why would it need to be created? So you really start from the bottom as like, okay, what what is our purpose? What's our goal? What's our why? And we're gonna get into some of those things here in a second. A couple other things that a brand does. It explains who you are, why you exist, what do you provide in the marketplace, what's your point of view. We're going to talk about that here a little bit more, and really, how do you show up in the marketplace? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like when your school district, or when your brand, or when your organization shows up um, in the marketplace? And really, the foundation of that is um, a brand architecture, and we're gonna get into a little bit more about that. But again, just getting at some of those questions about what makes you unique, how do you stand out in the crowd, and when you speak, when you communicate, when you're present in the marketplace, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it make other people feel like? So that's just, again, kind of going back to the beginning, thinking about if you're thinking about brand as your identity, as your logo, let your brain expand a little bit, because it's so much more, and it's so much more robust.
Exactly. Um, can you talked a little bit about brand architecture. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about that and about brand experience?
Yeah, let me get into a little bit of that. I'm going to ask Justin to pop up the graphic here. This is the architecture document that we use when we work with clients, and I'm going to talk through this. I'm not going to get into all the details, but talk through it a little bit. So as we work with clients, we fill out all of this. We do lots of engagement, lots of probing to find the appropriate things to put into this for each school district. And our approach to this is not about development of a brand for an organization. It's really about clarification. We believe that all organizations have a brand. It just needs to be uncovered, and it needs to be clarified. One of the things that in my experience in my school districts and now with clients is the brand might exist, but if you ask 20 people, they're all going to have a different perspective about that brand. So it's not clear. It hasn't been clarified. It's not universal. Everybody thinks it's something different. This document, this process really helps us to hone in on and clarify and be very focused and clear. I want to talk a little bit about those sections on the side, the strategy, brand expression, and marketing. The strategy is, and Coley's going to get into this in a second, it's the why, the how, and the what. And then we also introduce the notion of an archetype, which helps us kind of understand the point of view. The strategy piece is really inward facing. I like that when working with this, strategy is not the public things that you share, but it's really kind of those foundational ideas. It's more internal. It's used by superintendents and communications directors. It's an inward-facing document. The second piece is brand expression. So this is where we start to turn a little bit more outward, and this is how we sound, how we show up, how we express ourselves in the marketplace. And again, we think about values, think about voice, we think about tone, and again, all of those are unique to every organization, and we try to again uncover those and tease those out of the organization. And then finally, the piece on the side is marketing, and that's the full public facing. That's how your brand gets marketed and positioned in the marketplace. The one other thing that I will say is branding is more than just communicating through marketing. It's really speaking through, using your brand to speak, using your brand to process. We have a couple clients right now that are dealing with some very challenging and difficult issues, but with a solid brand. They use their brand to speak about that issue because the brand has given them foundation. It has given them purpose. It has defined who they are and how they respond. So responding to some of those more challenging and difficult issues is much easier with the foundation of this document.
Bob, you touched on the archetype. Coley, will you go into what a brand archetype is and why it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Bob did a great job of kind of setting the stage for the archetype, because I know the iceberg graphic is so overused, but it's so perfect in this because the archetype is really the base. That's like the first thing that we start with. And that comes to life through some discovery sessions that we do through districts. And like Bob said, it's really about uncovering who you already are. And so the archetypes really embody the universal stories and journey that all human beings share. So it helps us create meaning, and it provides a clear identity and a point of view. So the archetypes are really grounded in psychology and the work of Carl Jung, and they inform the personality of the brand. So all of those things that Bob just walked through in the architecture, which we'll dig into more later. And Justin's already on top of it, popping up the brand archetypes here. So here is one example of the 12 classic archetypes. So on the outside here, there are innocent, sage, explorer, hero, magician, rebel. All of those on the outside of the circle are the classic archetypes. And I will say, if you do a little research into that, some of those change based on where you get your sources from. For example, I know like rebel and outlaw tend to be interchanged. So there's a couple different versions of these out there. And then the inner circles, so like for rebel, since I was just talking about that, their inner circle is ego and liberation. And so those inner circles are the motivations for each of the archetypes. So it gives you just a really high level view of kind of the motivations behind each of those archetypes. And I'll give you a couple of examples because I think it really helps to kind of tie an archetype to the people because it gives them a personality. So for example, a hero archetype, a couple of examples of those would be Luke Skywalker or Harry Potter or Nike. And for the jester, a couple of examples would be Tina Fey, the Cat in the Hat, or M&Ms. And when I say all of those words or all those people, you start to think about different things in your head, how they show up in the world, what their tone and their personality is. So that's that kind of architecture or archetypes help you kind of start to understand what those archetypes really stand for. And it's really interesting because we've worked with a number of districts now, and all of them show up in different ways on this graph. So a couple examples, and we'll dig into a couple of these later, is in the Explorer archetype, which is where the North Face one is, District 191 is a Trailblazer, which is actually a sub-archetype of the Explorer archetype. One of our clients, Brooklyn Center Community Schools, is a Challenger, which is a sub-archetype of the Rebel or the Outlaw. And we are recently working with a client that we helped identify as the Sage archetype. And I have to say, they were kind of hesitant about it until we gave them the example of the Mayo Clinic. And once they dove into the Mayo Clinic and kind of started to like get an understanding of how they show up in the marketplace, they were all on board. So it kind of, those examples just are good living examples of how these brands are really playing out those archetypes. Yeah, and like I said, we'll dig into this a little bit more later, but it really helps to develop your motto, your goals. It helps identify some challenges. So like the Sage archetype that I was just talking about, that district or that archetype, one of the challenges is coming off as too arrogant. And so they know that. And so now as they're developing messaging, they're going to have to walk that line between being a leader in their community about different topics, but also not coming off as arrogant. So just lots of really fun things that happen within those archetypes.
Right.
So that's a good overall introduction to the archetype. How do you identify which archetype your organization is correctly? Bob?
Yeah, what we really do, and what I would suggest, it takes time and digging and understanding. You can't just open the book and say, oh, I want to be that. You really have to. Cole used the word discovery. We spend time with, when we're asked to do it, when we're invited to do this work, we spend several hours with a team of people, and we do some pre-research, and we really dig in. We learn about the organization, and we have people lots of conversation. We're mostly facilitating the conversation and taking notes and learning and gathering, and then kind of take what we learn and then analyze it. And we start to build those components of the archetype, components of the architecture. We start building that, and then 2 or 3 or 4 of us will come with ideas of archetype. We think this works. We think, and it's almost the first one is almost never right. I mean, it's somebody who comes and says, "Well, I think they're this." They're probably almost always wrong. We've had sessions where we've introduced the notion of archetype in the discovery session, and we don't do that anymore because the groups tend to latch on to something that they like, and it's almost always wrong because they see something different. Uh, the kind of approach that we take is an archetype needs to be both current and aspirational. So it needs to identify your school district as what it is and what it is now, but it also has to have that turn of what it is it becoming. So it's not just describe me today. It's really about describing what the future looks like. I will also say that there are some of the archetypes, if you get in and really learn about those 60 archetypes, there are many or several at least that are never going to match a school district. There's some that, like the jester archetype Cole used as an example, school districts would likely never align with that, but there's lots of other options that they would align with. The other thing that I will say is in all of the times that we have used this work and assisted school districts with that, we've never used the same archetype. So what that tells me and what that has taught me is every school district is different. So to think that well, I'm just a school district, this is what I do, it's not. There are things that make you unique. There are things that make you stand out in the crowd, that separate you from your neighbors. It just takes a little work to kind of dig through. The other thing I would say, and I kind of touched on this, I think the biggest mistake that districts might make in picking an archetype is finding one that they they really like or want to be like. For example, we worked with an organization that went through this process, and we had people say, "Well, we want to be like Apple." Well, you're not like Apple. You may want to be you want to be aligned with that, but that's not the characteristics of your organization. So I think there's a danger in picking an archetype off the shelf because it does take some reflection. It takes some thinking. It takes some time to make sure and in the end, it probably takes some perspective from the outside, or at least broader perspective involving voices in the school district, teacher perspective, administrative, parent perspective. We've had groups where we had student perspective, which is really wonderful. So you gain some perspective from a variety of stakeholders, but again, it comes down to finding that match from both a current and aspirational perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Bob, I think you nailed it when you said we help to uncover what the archetype might be. And we do that through those conversations with all those different stakeholders. Yeah. It's not just 5 or 6 or 7 people that are identifying who you are. I think that's the benefit of our branding process is you really get to hear from so many different voices and all of their different experiences, which all play a part in what your brand is.
Well, and because their experience is such a big part of this, it can't just be 1 or 2 people's experience of the brand that factors into that decision.
I think the other thing that's true about an archetype and a brand is it's foundational to the organization, and it doesn't shift easily when you get a new leader. Like, for example, superintendent can come in and say, we're going to redo the strategic plan, and they go in and redo it. It's possible to shift your brand, but it takes a lot of work. The brand kind of identifies you as an organization. And again, it doesn't mean you can't shift that brand, but it's not something that's done quickly, especially in a school district. It really is that voice and foundation of who you are as an organization.
Mm-hmm. So now that we know how you figure out which archetype your district is identified with, how do you use that archetype? So how would do we have an example of using an archetype to figure out the brand architecture? Coley?
Yeah, we sure do. So going back to the iceberg, so we have the archetype, which is the very bottom, and now we're going to start to build some of those other elements that will bring us to how it is expressed out into the world. So the first thing that we like to start with is the golden circle. And you can kind of think about the golden circle as like the strategy behind your brand expression. And when your what, your how, and your why are aligned, it really provides a filter through which you can make decisions. It's a foundation for innovation and building trust. We've had a couple districts that have been, like Bob said, in sticky situations, and they've come back to this what, how, and why. And that's how they've messaged out some of these changes and some of the stuff that's happening. So I think starting here and making sure that all of this is aligned is one of the most important parts. And I don't know if there's any Simon Sinek fans out there, but the why, in my point of view, is like the most important. You have to be really clear on your why. A lot of the times districts are really good at defining their what and their how, but a good brand really helps you identify your why. A lot of districts, well, not a lot of districts, all districts are about educating students. So that's your what and your how, right? And the why of your brand really needs to go a lot deeper than that. And it needs to provide kind of that unique point of view. So Justin is ahead of me again. He's going to pop up the brand architecture element. So this is going back to what Bob started the whole session with. And I'm going to walk you through an example of the Burnsville in District 191 here in Minneapolis. So first things first, we developed their archetype. So we help them identify as the trailblazer. And I'm just going to read you the description of what a trailblazer is, because I think it'll help. The trailblazer is the first to break ground on their quest for discovery. Innovative and driven, this sub-archetype of the explorer blazes new pathways to explore and learn from the world around them. The trailblazer strives to answer life's big questions, such as, why am I here? What is my purpose? The trailblazer is focused on self-discovery and self-sufficiency, working toward these goals through their intrepid and curious nature. And a couple examples of trailblazers are Amelia Earhart, Anthony Bourdain, and Cheryl Strayed. So once we had that archetype developed, that's when we dove into the golden circle. So that's the why, the how, and the what. And I'm also going to read those just to help you get a little bit of understanding. So the why is the next generation will do extraordinary things. That's the reason why their district exists. And they do that by creating engaging programs, services, and opportunities that encourage self-discovery and preparedness, inspiring the pursuit of lifelong learning and exploration. And they are an enterprising district of schools and community resources committing to removing barriers and blazing unique pathways for learning and enrichment to create a future-ready community. So that is really the basis of all the other work that we do, those 4 boxes. And we go back to those time and time again. Every time we're developing anything with District 191, we take a look at those and say, all right, are we aligned with all of our messaging and our graphics and the strategy, all of that? Does that all align? And so moving from strategy to kind of a little bit more of how the brand is expressed, you can see some of the words under values and personality and tone are curiosity and enterprising, passionate, open-minded. So we really think about that as we're developing some of the marketing ideas. So the marketing ideas is kind of that last piece to the architecture. And this is where you get to get really creative. And you can see how your brand is expressed in the world. So for District 191, their brand idea was fanning the flame, and then their campaign idea was spark, fuel, and blaze. And kind of a fun little tie-in to this is the Burnsville High School. They only have one high school, and their mascot is the Blaze. And so we kind of played on that because it fit really well into the Trailblazer archetype. And since we introduced the idea of spark, fuel, and blaze, they've kind of taken that and run, and that's how they're kind of communicating about the elementary, middle, and high school experiences. And so it's been really fun to see this idea that we pitched on a screen really come to life in so many different ways within the District 191 community.
Yeah.
So kind of jumping into that then, once you have that brand architecture, what comes next, Goalie?
All the fun stuff, Nicole. It's really reflecting your brand in all the ways that it shows up in the world. So websites, newsletters, social media, those are some of the easy like digital things that you can kind of change out really quickly. And then there's the bigger stuff like social media or signage, events. How are you gathering people? And does that reflect your brand? Staff recruitment and enrollment marketing efforts. Does that align with the type of staff that you want working in your buildings? All of those things can slowly start to reflect your brand. It doesn't happen overnight, I will say that. With Burnsville, I think we launched that like 3 years ago, their new brand architecture, and it has made significant changes in the last 3 years within a lot of the work that they've done, but there's still things that we're updating and we're finding. So there's definitely like work to continue to be done. And like Bob said, it's an aspirational thing as well. So it's not like this brand is who we are right now and everything's good. It's a good starting place to continue to build the brand. One thing I want to talk about is we haven't really talked a lot about logos. And so the branding process may or may not lead to a new graphic identity. I'm going to show you two examples. One is Burnsville again. So on the left is their district logo. They had that semi-recently updated when we started to work with them, and they had a lot of community buy-in and support for that. And so they didn't feel like they really needed to refresh their logo. But one of the things that we identified during our branding process was that this Pathways programs that they have was really a big piece of their trailblazing archetype. The Pathways program started as a 9-12 program at their high school that really helps kids dive into career interests and figure out what's next for them. And they wanted to expand that experience to pre-K-8 as well. And so one of the things that we helped them with was this kind of visual graphic identity for the Pathways program, since it was such an integral piece of their brand. On the other hand, sometimes your branding process will be screaming at you to do a new logo. Brooklyn Center is a great example of this. Their archetype was the challenger, and they're all about challenging the status quo and being champions of the marginalized. So their graphic identity needed to not look like it was hand-drawn by a middle schooler, and that it was something that was bold and representative of their brand voice. So we really helped to reimagine their centaur mascot and really gave it new meaning. The brand in Brooklyn Center has continued not only to push the graphic side of things, but really how it shows up in the world in all sorts of different places. One example would be in their buildings. So we launched the brand late winter 2020, right as the pandemic was hitting. And Brooklyn Center, we had a ton of student engagement. And so one of the biggest impacts with the visual side of the brand was with all the signage that we were able to add while students were out of school in those coming months as the pandemic hit. So when they walked back into their school buildings that first day after post-pandemic, they saw all these beautiful messages. this "We stand front and center" was their brand idea. And that language has really become part of their district. They actually redid their mission, vision, and values about a year after we launched the brand. And "We stand front and center" is now part of their vision, as well as it's one of their key values. So again, you just see the brand permeate all these different places. Another big example of the brand expression was in a lot of the enrollment materials. The screenshot on the left is of their microsite, their enrollment microsite. And this idea of "We Go Beyond" was one of our campaign ideas for them. And so that campaign was really kind of going one step further than "We stand front and center." So we had we stand front and center, and then "We Go Beyond" was like a campaign within that really focused on how BC is showing up for all of their students and their families. And in Brooklyn Center, it really goes a lot deeper than some of those visual pieces. Their superintendent really has embraced the brand. And two great examples of this are when George Floyd and Daunte Wright were murdered. Both of those times, she spoke and wrote with just truly raw emotion and passion that so many people at that time were feeling, but couldn't necessarily express. And she went back to the brand and to the Golden Circle, and she kind of struck that very delicate balance between being soothing and inspiring, but also standing front and center for her community, not just in her words, but in her actions and in the district's actions. So I think those two examples were just really stood out for me in how the Brooklyn Center brand has been expressed. And I'll share one more example and then I'll be quiet. Going back to Burnsville, we were able to work with their human resources team to recruit the next high school principal this spring. So this was about 3 years after we had originally developed their brand. And Bob and I went down there and we met with high school students, staff, and then some district leadership in a couple discovery meetings. And it was really incredible for us to sit there and listen to all of the feedback that people provided about what they wanted to see in their next principal, in their next leader of their school. And so many of their messages were so on brand with everything that we've been sharing the last couple of years. So that was just super cool to see, especially on the right here, you can see some of the ideal candidate language. All of that was directly from the mouths of the people that we were talking to. So that wasn't us pushing the brand. That was really what their stakeholders were saying that they wanted. And the campaign had great success. They had a ton of applicants. And the cool part about it was the candidates were able to kind of self-identify do I fit that? Do I fit that ideal candidate? And then we also had lots of language about the community at Burnsville. So is that a culture that I want to be a part of? I think so many times when we're doing staff recruitment, it's like very basic language about this is who we're hiring for. And especially for some of these big positions like principals and administrators, like, how is this district different from this district? And so this was just a really cool project to be able to work on and a great way to see how the brand continues to come to life in Burnsville.
Well, and it really shows how this kind of work can impact people in really deep ways. I mean, choosing an instructional leader and making sure they're aligned with your brand is a pretty profound way to make sure that you're living out the brand.
Well, and I think too, Nicole, the brand helps identify if you're a principal, you're going to know whether your values align with that school district and align with that brand. And it attracts people who are aligned with what that organization is doing. And that's one of the things, that's one of the greatest impacts of a clear and consistent brand. It draws like people together. It draws you in and go, I want to be a part of that. And that's exactly what it does. And it's so powerful to watch. I mean, when it doesn't, when it's so interesting to watch an organization that has a clear and consistent brand compared to one that doesn't, because it's very much night and day, because it how they appear in the marketplace and how they attract uh, people and interest is a very different experience.
And probably people are really responding to the authenticity of them having a clear message about their brand.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, and I think about the power of that, especially these days with how many districts need staff recruitment right now. Like, if you can lean back on your brand and like truly say, like, this is why we need bus drivers, and this is your impact as a nutrition services worker, like that is going to be so much more impactful than just your standard, hey, here are the positions we're hiring for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right. So what does this look like when the rubber meets the road? If somebody wanted to conduct a branding process in their district, or they wanted us to do it for them, what would it include? Bob?
Yeah, where we really start with, again, as I noted earlier, is deep dive, gathering information, understanding a variety of perspectives. If there is existing research, existing perception data, diving into that. If there isn't, getting some engagement, getting some input. A lot of times districts already have that, so we can kind of learn from that. We then suggest that we bring together a core team, and we usually go 8 to 10 to 12, sometimes 15. We've used larger teams. But then we kind of call them like the brand team. That's the group that we kind of really dig into. Again, we do some deeper dive with that group, and we again kind of get them to talk about themselves, get them to express themselves about the organization, what the organization looks and feels like, and really just surface information, surface emotion, surface perception about the organization, and to think about that in that way. Then we set about, once we have those discussions, we set about building the architecture. We look at the archetype. We start to build that golden circle, the why, the what, and the how, and then kind of cascade down to those things, and then come back to the organization, and then come back to the district and work again and say, okay, here's what we heard. Here's some ideas, and then we kind of work through that and establish establish that structure. And as Coley said, sometimes we continue on the process with a logo or graphic identity redesign, but sometimes we don't. I mean, sometimes we start with the brand process with the notion from the school district that says, yeah, we don't want to touch our logo. And then we have one district that's, after we've gone through the branding process, they're going, yeah, our logo doesn't fit this anymore. It doesn't match with who we are and what we're communicating. So sometimes those discovery things come out of it too. Just one other thing that I want to, we talked about, a lot of the examples we gave and a lot of conversation was about, using branding as a marketing messages. And what it also does is help you express ideas and help you respond and react. And one of my favorite examples was when school districts were responding to the Uvalde shooting a couple years ago. Almost every school district in America was creating a letter for parents or a message to parents in response to that, which was, of course, a very appropriate thing to do. I looked at I looked at probably 50 or 60 different messages that I could find from districts across the country about what they were saying. And with a couple exceptions, they were all very similar, not identical, but they were all very similar. And they were, they were kind of had the same words and the same themes and kind of expressed the same idea. And then I looked at a couple of the districts that had gone through our branding process and had gone through kind of clarifying and thinking through their brands. And not only were their messages different, they were aligned with that particular school district. And two in particular, these two districts were very close together geographically, but very different in terms of their brand and very different in terms of their communities and their approach. And both of their messages were just incredibly powerful and incredibly aligned with their brand. And so the brand really gives you a platform and a tool to speak through. It gives you that nice structure. So it's not just about how do we market, how do we show up, how do we hang signs and all that great stuff but it's really about what's the expression? How do we express ourselves as an organization in times of crisis, in sad times, in difficult times? I mean, that terrible shooting in Uvalde was a terrible time in our country, and yet these two school districts found a way to express something to their school district that gave perspective for those people in the community. So the power of the brand, again, kind of bringing this full circle, it's so much more than the logo. It gives you all of those kind of foundational tools that you can really build. You can really build your communication strategy from a clear and powerful brand.
Mm-hmm. Well, if anybody wants to ask us any questions, we're open for those now. So just type them in there. And if not, we actually have a question that we have received in the past that we thought we would tackle in the meantime, which was how does brand architecture relate or differ from the strategic plan? You mentioned that like a superintendent can come in and change the strategic plan, but it takes longer to change a brand.
Yeah.
What's the difference there, Bob?
Well, a brand is really the identity of the organization. So it's who you are, why you exist, and what makes you unique. That's the foundation of a brand. A strategic plan is really about how are you advancing the organization. In some ways, you can really think of a strategic plan as a way to deploy a brand. How do we interact? And a strategic plan is also more focused on the purpose of the organization. How do we continue to grow and improve what we do as a school district, improving results for children, teaching and learning. Oftentimes, strategic plans are focused on facilities and budgeting and how do we improve the organization that from the foundational place that the brand has created. And we get questions all the time that say, should I do the brand first or should I do the strategic plan first? And ideally, building a brand makes sense and then building a plan from that. But we've seen both ways, and there's no I don't think right or wrong answer. But again, the brand is foundational. It's a part of the organization, and it attracts people who align with what that organization is like.
Makes sense. Well, I know we had several people on this. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks to everybody who will watch this after we're done. If you have any questions after we're done, feel free to message us. And join us for our next live episode in August. We'll stay tuned for more on that. We will provide some more details about that in our newsletter, which you can sign up for. Just message us and we'll get you added. And we'll also be posting it on our socials. If you'd like to learn more about CESO and all the services we offer to school districts, including communications, go to theceso.com, THECESO.com. And if you'd like to talk to us about providing communication support in your district or your organization, contact Bob here. His contact information is on the screen, or any of us on the team. If you know any of us, call the person you know. We'd love to help you. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Coley. Thanks, Bob.